Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome all the participants to this side event today at the 15th session of the Conference of the State Parties, which has been organized by Transforming Communities for Inclusion, TCI, in partnership with the South Asian Disability Forum, Special Talent Exchange Program, and World Network of User Survivors of Psychiatry, and Pan-African Network of Persons with Psychosocial Disabilities. This event today will be moderated by myself and Ms. Elizabeth Ombati from African Disability Forum. My name is Waqar Puri. I am based in Pakistan, and I'm working with Transforming Communities for Inclusion as a senior programs manager. And I've been associated with the movement of persons with psychosocial disabilities since 2014. Transforming Communities for Inclusion, TCI, is an independent and global organization of persons with psychosocial disabilities, having its presence in 32 countries. TCI works with its national leaders and members to enhance and build their movements at the national level. TCI provides a platform to its members for advocating with the governments for inclusion, as well as advancement of the rights of persons with psychosocial disabilities. And some of our core programs include small grants, trainings, we provide fellowships, we do national and regional events, we do our sub-regionals, and we do country missions. So today's webinar, I will start with first saying out some of the features of today's webinar. We are pleased to inform you that this webinar is being recorded so that people who could not attend this webinar today can make a use of it, of the recording in the future. And there is an international sign interpretation. And if you want to access the captions, there is a CC button at the bottom of your screen through which you will be able to access the closed captions. I want to request all of the speakers to keep your mics and videos off while you are not speaking, and you can turn on your video while you're speaking on the panel. You are also requested to speak in a normal pace so that you know, the captioner and interpreter, they can catch up with the pace and flow of the presentations. During the event, if you have any questions for the panelists, you can leave your question at the Q&A option, which is again at the bottom of your screen. And the panelist will respond to it directly, or we will do a Q&A session in the end, depending upon the time. I would now like to thank all our distinguished guests and speakers who have joined today for the side event on a capacity strengthening of the organizations of persons with psychosocial disabilities to contribute to the 15th session of the Conference of the State Parties. As we all know, that COSP has been one of the most important events for the disability movement. I thank all the participants who have joined today for the preparation for the capacity building of DPOs and increasing the participation of persons with psychosocial disabilities in the decision-making processes. So because we have just like 1 hour, 15 minutes for this event, I will hand over the floor to Ms. Elizabeth Ombati, my facilitation partner for today, to share more about today's event. Liz, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Waqar. Please confirm that you can hear me.
Yes, Liz.
Thank you. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone joining in. My name is Elizabeth Ombati. I'm identifying as a woman with a psychosocial disability. I'm a member of the users and survivors of psychiatry in Kenya, and also a member of Transforming Communities for Inclusion. So I'm going to speak briefly about our theme today, capacity strengthening of organizations of persons with psychosocial disabilities in the Global South. Why is this important? So we come to the world identifying as persons with psychosocial disabilities, users and survivors of psychiatry, mad persons, and persons with intersectional neurodiverse identities. We remain an underrepresented disability group, and more often than not, our voices remain unheard in national movements, global development spheres, and other high-level policy circles. The gap between underrepresented groups and mainstream groups within the disability sector is also widening, as two critical issues of significant impact on lives of underrepresented groups are not yet addressed. This is the right to full legal capacity and the right to living in the community. While our worldwide movement has struggled to establish our presence in the disability narrative, discrimination multiplied through the COVID pandemic. Institutionalization of various groups of persons with disabilities, including persons with psychosocial disabilities, increased tremendously, exposing them to violations of human rights. People with psychosocial disabilities had no access to community support systems and services, social protection schemes, including in-kind support and cash transfers. They were unable to continue their education online and had no access to support and community-based services. And more worrying is the fact that within the human rights and discourse, we put inside the box of right to mental health care. So we notice a tsunami of mental healthification of human rights, pushing us back to just being forced subjects of healthcare and closed-door institutions. This limits our access to the open world and its opportunities for inclusion through the realization of civil, political, social, economic, and cultural rights as prescribed by the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So this disregard for our role as OPDs, hard won by the World Network of Users and Survivors of Psychiatry in the making of the CRPD, reinforced the conventional mental health paradigm with its core theme of coercion, even after 16 years of the CRPD being enforced throughout the world. Investments we see continue in the direction of reforming mental health care, and we see that bilateral agencies, different ministries, technical support organizations, even service providers in the disability sector are not inclusive of our constituents in a genuinely respectful way. And as a marginalized disability constituency, we need excellent and inclusive supports and services, which will give us an opportunity for living independently in inclusive communities. So we are calling on the diversity of stakeholders to recognize us as belonging in the disability sector and to share opportunities with us for full and genuine inclusion and the realization of the CRPD to enable our full and effective participation. We thank in advance all speakers today who are going to share their expertise and experiences as a way to get us closer to that which we seek. Thank you so much. Back to you, Waka.
Thank you so much, Liz. And thanks for highlighting the issues related to our identity and the impact on us when the governments are promoting the mental health laws rather than including us in the disability inclusion agenda. And the governments continue to make investments in the establishment and in the establishment of even the government institutions as well as the private institutions, and ultimately it promotes the institutionalization of persons with psychosocial disabilities. And now is the time that we get together and unite our voices and advocate for the community inclusion and community support systems together. So let's move forward, and we'll talk more about this in the webinar today. And thank you, Liz, once again. We will now move to our first keynote speaker, Mr. Agus Hassan Hidayat. Agus is a youth with disability rights activist focusing on the rights of young persons with psychosocial disabilities. He is one of the founding members of TCI as well as TCI, and he has been a TCI fellow as well. And he founded Remisi, an organization of persons with psychosocial disabilities in Indonesia. He works with youth with psychosocial disabilities through peer support group programs, social media campaigns, disability rights advocacy, and awareness campaigns to raise the issue of persons with psychosocial disabilities to the public. Agus, over to you, and please take the floor. You have like 7-8 minutes for your speech. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Wakar. I hope you guys can hear me well. First of all, I would like to say that it's actually an honor to be here to speak about this issue. As a youth with psychosocial disability living in Indonesia, it is really hard to talk about mental health conditions. We have to hide it in the workplace due to a huge societal stigma that could affect our reputation. We have got an enormous problem in completing the task at school, and we are too afraid to ask for help for reasonable accommodations because we are fearful that people will spread out the news. Young persons with psychosocial disabilities are very dependent on family support due to the difficulties in finding and keep a job. Yet sometimes psychosocial disabilities have to be hidden even from our own families due to the stigma. Some of us who do not have enough support, we face all forms of violence and torture. We have no independence because our thoughts and opinion are ignored and our legal capacity is abolished. In some countries, we are caged because we are considered not sane enough. Homelessness, poverty, and institutionalization are realities and a real threat for young persons with psychosocial disabilities in many countries. Thousands of us are still living in the institution today. Institutionalization for persons with psychosocial disabilities in Indonesia and many parts of the world is cruel and prison-like, or we could say it is a detention center. The identity of these young people is often associated with being dangerous, less than human, or burdening the family. For some of us who already get in touch with medical services, we face another problem. The psychiatrist rules our life. The psychiatrist and our family are the only one who know everything about us. Our opinion is not counted because we are just young people with psychosocial disabilities. They make the problem sound easy, and the answer to all those problems is in a small psychiatric pills with high prices and some side effects that sometimes make me feel better to stay what they call insane. Young persons with psychosocial disabilities rarely have the opportunity to participate equally in society due to preconceived notions and stigma about our identities. We are segregated from society, isolated from the broader disability community itself, and mostly excluded from policy discourses. Thousands of us are still living within the institution or social care institution. We are punished without doing any crime just because we have a psychosocial disability. We are punished like a criminal. The difference is the criminals know way they will be released, but we are not. Remember about 20 years ago when our parents and teacher asked, we were so bored that the future was so promising. Let's forget about the cool professions such as pilot, teacher, or even a president. And let's forget that people say the youth are agents of change or the future. Some of us right now desire one simple dream. It is to be released from those cages and prisons. They want to live independently and to be included within the community, with all access to community-based social services that should be provided by our government. This includes the needs of education and training to have a decent job, transitional and public housing, and a comprehensive social protection scheme that could cover what we need is very crucial. This has to be provided to fulfill our rights as human being. Lastly, I would like to say that it is significant to implement progressive realization of independent living for youth with psychosocial disability, and also to develop a strong guideline for the institutionalization for young person with psychosocial disability, as we need the independence to live within the community with education, skill to have a proper job and all services that we need, as we need to live in the society freely without stigma to achieve full participation in the community. I would like to encourage every stakeholder to invite us to give us to be able to be invited and to be heard in the policymaking, in the leadership, and include us as an agent of change to build our future from now. Thank you. I'm really happy to cede the floor back to you, Waqar. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Agus, and especially the points which you raised. Like most importantly, highlighting the issue and highlighting the importance and need for the deinstitutionalization of persons with psychosocial disabilities, and the community support systems, and the support required from the families, the supports which we require from the government, such as social protection schemes, cash transfers, housing, peer support, employment opportunities. I think these are all of those aspects which, when are provided to people with psychosocial disabilities, inclusion is possible. And definitely youth with people with psychosocial disabilities are the agents of change, and we must be included in all decision-making processes, in all government and high-level political agendas. Thank you so much, Agus, for sharing your statement with us. And with this now, we will move to our next speaker, Mr. Matrika Devkota. Matrika is Executive Director in Koshish, an organization of persons with psychosocial disabilities in Nepal. Matrika is one of the oldest members of TCI and has been recently elected as treasurer of TCI. Koshish has been working in Nepal for the elimination of barriers to persons with psychosocial disabilities and bring policy reforms. Over to you, Matrika. The floor is yours.
Good evening, good morning, and good afternoon. Thank you, Parker. Thank you, and distinguished guest and participant. My name is Matrika Devkota, and I'm based in Nepal. I'm also TCI's members from its beginning. And especially like I started getting psychosocial issues and barrier from the age 15. And because that I struggle, that motivated me to come to this campaign. And especially the barriers and person with disabilities and for psychosocial disabilities, we are facing more attitudinal barrier, institutional barrier, cultural prejudice, misconception of psychosocial issues, communication barrier, socio-economic barrier, and also legal barrier. So we know that disability is not impairment, but barrier. And we are the person living with psychosocial barrier. So I'm proud that I'm a person with psychosocial disability or psychosocial barrier. So ultimately, this has been ultimately based on stigmatizing psychosocial individual affected by those issues. In Nepal, legal barrier exists in the form of discriminatory and derogatory provision in the various laws and regulation against such individual. Resultantly, the person with psychosocial disability has been physically chained, wrongfully confined, stigmatized, discriminated, treated as other, feared, pitied, or viewed as a less value. Excluded in every aspect of life, social, cultural, economic, political, incapacitated, institutionalized, substitute decision-making processes denied from exercising civil, political, and economic right, denied the opportunities, participation, livelihood, empowerment, prejudice, derogated thought order. Our legal research of COPS identified prevailing 69 out of 305 Act, 12 regulation of Nepal discriminatory. Persons with psychosocial are disqualified even to be a director, restricted to have the contact, incompetence to conclude contact, disqualified to establish an organization, disqualified to become a guardian, disqualified to become insurance agent, surveyor, broker, incompetence to pose candidacy election, ineligible to vote, ineligible to being candidate for teaching license. These acts and regulations are inconsistent with United Nations Convention on the Right of Persons with Disabilities, thus the country's state parties. Apart from derogatory terms are being used in legal framework, for example, in 22 acts using mental illness or mental disorder, in 28 act unconscious, 4 act loss of mental balance, 3 acts brain damage, 2 acts mental incapacitated, crazy in 3 acts. Use of such derogatory terminology inconsistent with the Article 17 CRPD, which stipulate the parties ensure every person have a right to respect physical and mental integrity equal basis to other. Therefore, I've been advocating for the use of dignified terminology like person with psychosocial disabilities or person with mental health condition. Apart, I have filed public interest litigation in the Supreme Court seeking voting right, so as a person abolish of such derogatory and discriminatory provision and have the also society prevention strategy to meet challenges this matter. To facilitate an enabling environment for the full inclusion of persons with psychosocial disability, there need to be policy shift from mental disorder to psychosocial disability. Public health to inclusive development, institutionalization to inclusion, treatment to support system. My organization relying on the United Nations Convention on the Right of Persons with Disabilities, 2006. Overcome this barrier, provide an equal basis to a person with psychosocial disability with the other basis human dignity, as also the true inclusion in as particular Article 19 CRPD, right to living independently, being included in the community. So we are promoting peer support, self-advocacies, and remedies matter of this kind of discriminative provision. We are working further peer support, self-help groups in federal, provincial, and local level. We're using the tools of CRPDs, and we're working together with other partner academic institutions and making the right real. And I believe that CRPD, implementation of CRPD that ensures all the right, and this is the era of CRPD. And I like to continue and my lifelong journey for implementation of CRPD, both in CRPD compliance, societies, services, and also equal basis to other people, the respect, dignity, in line with the Convention on the Right of Persons with Disabilities. Thank you very much for this opportunity to share. Now back to my colleague, Bhagar.
Thank you. Thank you, Matrika. I'm really sorry. I just lost a connection in between, and I really could pick only some of your points. And and it's always, great hearing from you, as you mentioned that there is a need for a shift in our policies from the terms from mental disorder to psychosocial disabilities. And there is a need that the governments promote the disability compliance legislation rather than the mental health laws. And I think that there is a need that when we talk about these compliances, we must work with the cross disability movements and the government institutions to create those inclusive systems and inclusive services which are CRPD compliant, and therefore also to facilitate an enabling environment. As you said, we need to promote the self-help groups and peer support groups to support our movement at the national level for the policy reforms. Thank you once again, Matrika, and it is an honor to have a senior person like you with us. So now we'll move to our last keynote speaker, Mr. Washington O. Sati. Mr. Sati is a commissioner at the vice chairperson of the Commission on the Administrative of Justice at the Office of Ombudsman in Kenya. As a disability inclusion and governance and human rights expert, he has an extensive experience in human rights issues, research, and advocacy, with specialists in school, political, and economic rights, as well as project management, including needs identification, design implementation, budgeting, reporting, monitoring, and evaluation. Mr. Sati will share with us how he has been in government and been supporting the movement of persons with psychosocial disabilities in Kenya. Over to you, Mr. Sati. You have 7 to 8 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wakar. Kindly confirm if you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you very well.
Awesome. Thank you. And it's really an honor to be part of this side event to discuss on the issues of persons with psychosocial disabilities. This is an issue that remains important or dear in my heart, because as a country, the issues of psychosocial disability persons have been left behind within the disability fraternity. And therefore, as the office of the Ombudsman, this is to us, it's a human rights institution, which of course was formed to promote the rights of Kenyans within the public administration. As a human rights institution, we, of course, remain key players in promoting the rights of persons with psychosocial disability, because their voice alone cannot achieve social, political, or economic rights. And therefore, different human rights institutions within this country should put their hands together to push for the rights or for the rights. In this presentation, I was requested to discuss on what are the roles of the Office of the Ombudsman in supporting the movements of persons with psychosocial disability in Kenya. I will quickly highlight 4 areas that this office has been supporting. As you all know, and you all appreciate my work, we receive, or it receives, complaints against public officers or public institutions when it comes to issues around unfair treatment, delays of services, abuse of office, among other issues. I must mention that in Kenya, we've received complaints from persons with psychosocial disability when they're denied services. Like, for example, in Kenya, we have a disability card that is very fundamental in the enjoyment of their rights, in helping them enjoy basic services like education support, tax exemption, among other services. The country is yet to appreciate that. And as the Office of the Ombudsman, we've received and processed those complaints. And where they are within the law, we of course issue those institutions orders for them to make sure that they give services to persons with psychosocial disabilities that have complained. The second area that we play a very important or key role also is on issuing of advisories. As a public institution, we recognize that many issues of persons with disabilities, when it comes to employment, political participation, access to other basic services, is normally, or they are normally excluded. And therefore, we've always issued advisories to relevant responsible ministry, and particularly for National Council for Persons with Disabilities, to ensure that the rights of persons with psychosocial disability are included in all those processes. We are a government agency, and our advisories are legally binding. I will like to encourage organizations of persons with psychosocial disabilities to join us so that we can continue to issue more advisories to have their rights implemented. The third area, which the Office of the Ombudsman continues to perform in support of persons with psychosocial disability, is around access to information. Persons with psychosocial disability have rights to access information held by different government agencies. Government agencies hold very, very important information. And we appreciate that sometimes requests from persons with psychosocial disabilities has been denied. And we therefore any complaints, and of course summon those institutions or public institutions that deny access of that information, because we know this information leads to realization of their economic and social rights. That remains a very important role of the Office of the Ombudsman. We've not received many complaints around this area, and we'll be happy to work with organizations of persons with psychosocial disability so that whenever they're denied this request, they can come to us. The final area that I would like to highlight is we, as the Office of the Ombudsman, has a mandate of collaborating and working together with organizations of persons with psychosocial disabilities to educate them on their rights. I believe that many grassroots institutions don't know if they have these rights, or they're even aware of their legal capacity. And sometimes as a person, they miss this capacity. And therefore, they might not have capacity or the ability to hold the right, the duty bearers responsible as well. So we are able to help them collaborate with other institutions as they work with us to demand on their rights. As a public institution, we believe that when the citizenry or persons with disabilities are not empowered, then they are not able to claim or demand for their rights. And that remains a very important area in supporting persons with psychosocial disability. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you for the opportunity to make this presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sati. Thank you so much for supporting the movement in Kenya. And I think it is one of the key components when the governments, cross-disability stakeholders and the disability stakeholders and the movement of people with psychosocial disabilities come together, and definitely it can create an impact to bring the policy reforms, and it is also important for the full and effective participation of persons with psychosocial disabilities in a country. And all supports you mentioned from the Ombudsman are so praiseworthy, especially the access to information issue has been like a big barrier, and it's been a lot discussed in our movement, because people with psychosocial disabilities who are confined and chained in the institutions are totally neglected, and they receive no information. And also people with psychosocial disabilities who are confined in the houses and are not supported by their families, their friends, and they also have no access to information, whether they can get social protection or what services are available for them at the country level. Thank you also for highlighting the empowerment, that why it is important to empower people with psychosocial disabilities, because when you start empowering people with psychosocial disabilities, it will create an impact. It will create organizations of people with psychosocial disabilities at the national level, and it will create impact in advocating for the rights of people with psychosocial disabilities. I would really emphasize on this point that if there are government participants listening to us in this webinar, we just need to start from the small things, and it will be, and these are some initial starts which we need to take. It's initial partnerships which we need to do, and we can do big things together. I would just, before Liz giving it to you, I will just want to, acknowledge the comments which are coming in the chat box. We are reading them, and thank you for sharing all those sentiments with us. And yes, the questions which are being raised about the access to the recording of this webinar, yes, for sure, you will be shared. We will share a link with all the participants attending this webinar today, so that you can access the link of this webinar later on. Now I will hand over the floor to my colleague Elizabeth Ombati to continue the webinar from here. Over to you, Liz. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Waka, and all the speakers for all those brilliant points that are being raised. So this next brief session, we are going to engage two great leaders, Ms. Hawa Ojefo and Dorothy Nakato. And we see that as the Civil Society Forum puts a focus on deinstitutionalization. So we're going to look at briefly on issues around in the context of deinstitutionalization. So Madam Ms. Hawa Ojefo, the Executive Director at She Rights Woman, an award-winning movement that gives mental health a voice in Nigeria. We are happy to have you here with us. So please share with us in this context, what can help or what helps you or persons with disabilities facing multiple forms of discrimination, including women and girls with psychosocial disability, the right to enjoy the right to live in the community. Please talk to us on that topic, Ms. Hawa.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, the attendees. Thank you so much to TCI for having me here today. My name is Hawa Ojefo. I am a person, woman who lives with a psychosocial disability, and I run an organization here in Nigeria called She Rights Woman Mental Health Initiative. And we're a movement that gives mental health a voice in Nigeria by empowering people who actually live with mental health conditions to tell their own stories, co-create the solutions, and advocate for their rights. And when it comes to the institutionalization or anything really that has to do with, people with psychosocial disabilities like myself, in Nigeria, we're dealing with first an environment where there isn't enough legislation for that protects the rights of people with psychosocial disabilities. And whilst I say that in the broader sense, I'd also acknowledge that for the longest time, people with psychosocial disabilities have also been marginalized within the disability community as well. So when I think about gender issues and deinstitutionalization, for us, what has worked so far in influencing the legislation that is before the National Assembly here in Nigeria, working with the disability movement, engaging and advocating with legislators across the board and commissions and MPAs really is first off ensuring that it is participatory. And when I say participatory or I talk about meaningful participation, I don't just mean, you have a committee or a roundtable and then say, oh, this is one person that lives with the you would usually see a service user and, that's the person there. And then we look at it and we realize that it's not sufficient. So when we talk about meaningful participation, we're saying, do we have the right person to contribute in the right way at the right time in the given context that presents itself? And this is very important. So for us as an organization, in order to get to that place where we can equip people to carry out meaningful participation, we have done a lot of work, thanks to organizations like Disabilities Rights Fund, who have helped us to train nearly 200 people who have psychosocial disabilities, who have lived experiences of mental health conditions, to be able to understand their rights, to be able to carry out strategic advocacy, and to be able to sit on tables where decisions are being made about people with psychosocial disabilities. And for us, while this is very pivotal in advocating, is that when we look at everything that happens within, everything that needs to be changed within the environment, from deinstitutionalization to, access to community-based healthcare and things like that, it just feels like on this side of the world, it feels like a lot of things at once. We're looking at an environment that is finding it hard to fund certain things, and then you're telling it to move to the other extreme. And for so many legislators and policymakers, it feels like an unrealistic, expectation in the immediate term. So what we push for a lot of times, and what has worked for us in significantly changing the framework and the paradigm of things, and of course, this is just us scratching the surface, is ensuring that we are at the table. First things first, that we are at the table, but also led advocacy movement, really, because we realize that when it comes to women's issues, again, it's layers and layers of marginalization within, whether it's the disability community or the broader context. We're having people, marginalized people with disabilities, or marginalized people with psychosocial disabilities, or marginalized women with psychosocial disabilities as well. And so it is important that for us, we look at who is the furthest behind and try to make that person or that group stay at the forefront so that all the rights of the people that come before them are automatically carried forward with it. And so we take women-led advocacy very seriously, and we have found it to be very instrumental and very impactful in advancing the realization of persons with psychosocial disabilities. I'll speak on one more thing, and that is for us providing best practices and hearing stories of abuses within institutions. And it has been severely impactful, where we create an environment where advocacy targets, for example, can hear firsthand what happens. It's important for us to document using multimedia to convey the stories, appealing to all kinds of emotions and normative strategies and things like that, to ensure that different kinds of people can hear the stories, can see the stories, and we can put the people with lived experience at the forefront. And whenever we do this and we create an environment where this can happen, we see that issues like deinstitutionalization are taken very seriously. Just on May 31st, we had a high-level roundtable with a disability commission here in Nigeria, and just putting about 3 people with lived experience and showing videos from our partners also at Human Rights Watch, and the work that we have done in documenting cases of abuse within institutions moved the entire commission to put together that same day a working group to ensure the deinstitutionalization and the prevention of abuses of people with psychosocial disabilities is moved as a top priority, and the budgetary allocations are made. This happened within a less than 2-hour meeting. So for us, these are some of the things that we do, because we realize how diverse, many countries in the global South are, and how underfunded and undeveloped a lot of aspects of the society can be. And as much as possible, in order for us to make that big impact, we want to get our legs through the door first. When we get it through the door, we can then, carry out all the strategies that are necessary to move people towards action. But it is important that we are equipped to carry out that meaningful participation. Thank you very much, and over to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Hawa, for those powerful sentiments. And really, I'm talking about, storytelling, telling our own stories, you being able to document, experiences of abuse within these institutions, and there, the government being able to actually take action and have this working group, and really, hopefully that there is much that will be done, that you've shown that this is what is happening, that we hope indeed that something will happen. Now, just a small question, Hawa. In terms of the prayer camps, we know that there exist prayer camps, where a lot of abuses happen in your context. Is it something that is changing? Is it something that we'll talk briefly about, maybe a minute or so?
Absolutely. Thank you, Elizabeth, for bringing that up. Yes, indeed. Prayer camps, traditional healing centers, these are huge issues. I mean, we always talk about the conventional aspect of, medical or psychiatry as well. There have always been alternative practices that take place within society, some of which have proven to be instrumental within, especially the African context, with regards to supporting people that have psychosocial disabilities or mental health conditions and things like that. We have seen abuses there as well. We have documented, our partners have documented, we have supported international organizations to document some of these issues there. And what happens, like you said, is that when we tell these stories, what then happens is that when the government finds out, and because they see that it is gaining that international traction, and of course, many governments don't want to expose themselves in that type of way, because indeed it is the failure on their part to have these happening and they not being at the forefront to either nip it in the bud or provide the necessary support that people need, so that people do not be at the mercy of these abusive practices as well. And so what we have seen is that when these stories come out, or when these news is broken, a lot of the government is actually closing some of these facilities. But I believe that there is so much more. We cannot just be reactive to it. We can't just tell the stories and then hope that the governments take action. What are we doing to create an environment where such practices never even come up in the first place? What are we doing to ensure that even if we cannot eliminate certain things, we can bring them and ensure that they are documented, they are monitored, and that their practices can also be upgraded, because some of them are really instrumental to the people at the grassroots. And with certain traditional practices, what can we do to ensure that people's human rights are not violated through these alternative practices? Because there is indeed a place for alternative practices.
Thank you so much, Hawa, for those sentiments and for all the work that you're doing. So we will go to Dorothy Nakato in Uganda. a woman with a psychosocial disability, a Bridge CRPD SDGs alumni, and a fellow with Transforming Communities for Inclusion, TCI-Global. Dorothy, I know you do a lot of work at the grassroots, yeah, and as Hawa is talking about, you know, the lack of community support systems, you know, please talk to us about challenges and recommendations for access to support and community-based services when we are talking about the institutionalization. Kindly, over to you, Dorothy.
Yes, thank you so much, Liz, and everybody. Thank you so much for all our listeners. Yes, I'm Dorothy Nakato. I'm a woman with social disabilities from Uganda, and I'm a fellow with Transforming Communities for Inclusion. Sorry, you'll be hearing some noise. I'm near a mosque, and I think it's time for prayers. So hope it will not distract so much. Yes. Have you ever thought why a great number of persons with psychosocial disabilities are living in the institutions or on the streets, homeless? This is because they lack support, access to support and services within the community. And I'm a witness. Independent living and being included in the community requires full and legal capacity, access to housing, support and service options that enables a person to regain full control over their lives. A core element of independent living and being included in the community is that all persons with disabilities have the support that they require to carry out daily activities and participate in society based on their choices. Support should be individualized, personalized, offered through a variety of options, including personal assistance, peer support, crisis support, housing, and many other community-based services. However, persons with psychosocial disabilities face high challenges in access to support and community-based support services, as I discussed with you. We face a challenge of denial of legal capacity. Persons with psychosocial disabilities are always denied their right to choose and respect of will and preferences. They are always presumed to be unable to live independently within their self-chosen communities. Support is tied only to particular living arrangements. They are also denied legal capacity in choosing, managing, and determining the provision of community support services. We also face another challenge of unsupportive legal and policy frameworks in our countries. There are not yet laws and policies addressing supports for persons with disabilities to live independently and being included in their communities. Supports are not explicitly mentioned in our national laws, including the mental health laws. It's so unfortunate that the mental health laws are still implementing the substituted decision-making regimes for us. For example, the Uganda Mental Health Act, which has just been enacted in 2019, Part V, Section 61, it provides for support. And it states that person with mental illness has the right to appoint personal representative. However, it deviates from the CRPD. In Article 62 of the Act, it states that the person appointed as personal representative under Section 1 should make decisions taking into account the best interest of the person with mental illness. I consider this as substitute decision making, and it considers the best interest, not the will and preference for us, which the CRPD demands. We still face a challenge that most of the supports are not recognized by law, like the advanced directives are not recognized anywhere in the laws of our countries. Another point is that there is little or no existence of formal support services in our communities for persons with psychosocial disabilities. So persons with disabilities mainly depend on informal support-based networks, in particular families, who also burn out with no support. I give an example. A youth with psychosocial disabilities complained that his mother is tired of taking care of him because this mother keeps telling him that he moves like a dog which does not cut nails. This hurt him so much. So this youth ran to an OPD leader home for support. And while talking to the mother said it's too much for her. She doesn't have any other support for this youth who has a mental illness. We also face another challenge of denial of reasonable accommodation in access to mainstream services in the community, like education, employment, access to justice. Yet the CRPD Article 2 states that denial of reasonable accommodation amounts to discrimination. An example in point is a woman with psychosocial disabilities was employed as a head teacher, but along the way, she got a mental health breakdown. And when she wanted to return to work, the board of directors of this school held several meetings to dismiss her, in their argument that she may endanger the learners and she may not be performing. This school was supported by an OPD to maintain this lady with psychosocial disabilities in employment, but however, she was still demoted to a class teacher. We still face another challenge of lack of access to safe, accessible and affordable housing for persons with psychosocial disabilities. And this has led many of us to live in the institutions. I give credit to Habitat International, together with Stanbic Bank in Uganda, that made effort to make sure that people of psychiatric institutions benefits from their housing project for the vulnerable. We also face a great challenge of negative attitude, prejudice against persons with psychosocial disabilities to live within their communities. An example in point, a community member one time explained to me how a person with psychosocial disabilities was knocked down by a vehicle in the road, and the community remained unbothered and only said to themselves that it's the madman who has been knocked down. This man died with no support. And this always occurs at several points. Also, another point, I came across mob justice when they had beaten a man with psychosocial disabilities who had gone to a restaurant to request for water to drink. And instead, the man was beaten down and the crowd was shouting that there is no need to get closer to a mad person. To me, it hurts that we do not have support within the communities. What do I recommend? We need legal reforms to repeal and amend all laws that deny legal capacity to persons with psychosocial disabilities. We need support services and supports that enable us live within the community to be explicitly stated within the national laws. We need awareness raising on the right to independent living and being included in the communities. We need meaningful consultation of persons with psychosocial disabilities and their organizations in the development and introduction of all support systems. We need social protection services that are inclusive, that promote participation, inclusion of persons with disabilities, including persons with psychosocial disabilities.
Dorothy,
In
please
conclusion,
wind up. Thank you.
In conclusion, as a marginalized disability constituents, we need excellent and inclusive support and services which will give us opportunities for living independently and being included in the community. We call upon all governments, global technical support organizations, international organizations to invest in support and community-based support services. Thank you so much, Liz, and thank you so much for our listeners.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dorothy, for all those points. And for me, I think what is really key, and as we talk about capacity strengthening of organizations of persons with psychosocial disabilities, is to have, self-advocates, at country level, to be able to raise up these points that Dorothy has raised, points that Howard has raised, and really to thank all the advocates within all the countries who are in this webinar, who are doing all this work at national level, at global level, highlighting, our legislations that are discriminatory, highlighting the lack of community support, highlighting instances where our dignity, the personhood of people is not honored, and really just to keep going on at this and just raising our voices at every point to say that support self-advocates, support organizations of persons with psychosocial disabilities to be able to do this. So thank you so much, Hawa and Dorothy, for this session. I take it back to Waka to wind up with our two next key speakers.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Liz. And thanks to Hawa, thanks to Dorothy for highlighting for your statements. And we are really short of time, so we'll move quickly to the next session. Next session is with the cross disability movement, and because we have been talking about the partnerships, and we know that partnerships with cross disability movements are one of those key elements which can help the movement of people with psychosocial disabilities, and we always we always seek support from the cross disability movements for taking our agenda forward. So without wasting any time, I will invite Mr. Atif Sheikh. Atif Sheikh is chairperson of South Asian Disability Forum and executive director of STEP, a cross disability organization in Pakistan. He is an inclusive social development specialist with over an experience of more than 2 decades in program management, technical advisory, and doing advocacy work in Pakistan. Atif sir, we would really love to hear from you the support you have been given to giving to people with psychosocial disabilities, and how you have been supporting their movement at the national level as well as at the regional level. And over to you, sir. Atif sir. Hello, Atif, can you hear us? I think there is some technical issues at his end, and we'll move to the next speaker. Maybe he joins us back, and we can then come back again to Atif. Our next speaker for today's webinar is Sally. Sally is CEO of United Disabled People of Kenya, and UDPK is an umbrella organization of persons with disabilities in Kenya. Thank you, Sally, for giving us time today for this webinar and contributing to this important agenda today. And we also thank you for your entire support in Kenya, for supporting and working with our members for the recently which we have committed for the TI guidelines work and consultations. Sally, over to you. I give the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Wakar. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you well, Sally. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And thank you very much to my fellow panelists for your wonderful and insightful presentations. I'm really, really pleased and have the pleasure of joining you this afternoon on this important discussion of strengthening engagement between persons with psychosocial disabilities and the cross-disability movement at the national level. And I'm going to share with you our experience as Kenya and our journey towards this. So let me say that UDPK is the umbrella organization, like you said, of organizations of persons with disabilities, and we draw membership from organizations of persons with different disabilities, including organizations of persons with psychosocial disabilities. The reality, however, is that it is not always that persons with psychosocial disabilities are members of OPDs. This means that we can have barriers in creating the unity that we so desire within the disability movement in Kenya. First, if persons with disabilities are not present to highlight and focus on their issues, this means also that there will be gaps in terms of the cross-disability movement, also in terms of advocating for issues of persons with psychosocial disability. So what is our experience in Kenya so far? In Kenya, we have a national movement of persons with psychosocial disabilities, which is led by users and survivors of psychiatry in Kenya, who have done quite a bit of advocacy on specific issues affecting persons with psychosocial disabilities in Kenya. This has also resulted in them having a space within the cross-disability movement in Kenya. UDPK continues to work closely with persons with psychosocial disabilities through their representative organization, USP Kenya. For example, at the national level, we have the Caucus on Disability Rights Advocacy. This is a space that brings together all persons with different disabilities, including persons with psychosocial disabilities and their organizations, to identify our priorities in terms of advocacy as a country, and then we present them together to the duty bearers. So from our experience as UDPK, we have learned that there is need to strengthen the self-advocacy by persons with disabilities, and my fellow panelists have made reference to this. In so doing, we will strengthen their voice within the disability movement. And just to give you a few examples. So in Kenya, we've been implementing programs such as the Inclusion Works program, which endeavors to enhance employment of persons with disabilities in Kenya. And we have also had the bridge training that is offered by the International Disability Alliance. This training contributes to strengthening the capacities of organizations of persons with disabilities and self-advocates in using the human rights approach to enhancing the rights.
I think it's issue at Sally's end, and so
yeah, sorry
Sally,
about
are you
that.
here? Okay, yeah.
Yes, can you hear me? Yeah, we continue to work closely with USP Kenya to strengthen its institutional capacity, because when their capacities are strengthened as their institutions, their voices become stronger within the movement. Despite all our efforts, there's a lot of work that we continue to have to do. My colleagues have talked about barriers, legal barriers. The issue of legal capacity has been well explained by Dorothy from Uganda. Persons with disabilities, persons with psychosocial disabilities continue to face this stigma and discrimination. And Agus, in his presentation, gave a very good example. This discrimination prevents them from accessing crucial services that are offered in our communities. So as the disability community in Kenya, we are continuing to agitate for community-based services that will go a long way in, for instance, preventing the institutionalization of persons with psychosocial disabilities. We also need, and we are continuing to create awareness and to support the movement of persons with psychosocial disabilities and self-advocates in Kenya to create awareness and to support communities on the right to live independently and to be included in the community as enshrined by the UNCRPD. Thank you very much for listening to me about our experience in Kenya. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sally. I have been receiving messages from the interpreter and some other colleagues that we have to leave. But quickly, before leaving, Atif Saab, I will just give you floor because we are over time. And if you can quickly round up on your support, I've been already introduced you. So I'll not do the introduction once again. So if you can come to the point, you can just speak on your points again. And we can just finish the webinar because the time is running. Over to you, Atif Saab.
Thank you very much, Fakar, and congratulations for the organizer, TCI Asia, and all the partners for organizing such an enriched and beautiful discussion today. And I'm very happy to know that, very happy to be part of it, that we are having the second side event in the conference of the state parties on this very grave issue. The issue of representing the underrepresented groups of persons with disabilities was a topic which was never discussed at the power corridors. It was never discussed at the international platform. So congratulations to TCI Asia and the supporting partners and organizations participating in this strengthening of this network to have this important discussion and collecting all the important people on the topic today. Very few things, most of the things have been mentioned, most of the action points, most of the important talks have been mentioned already by the speakers, and it's really a difficult task to be the last speaker. But I would like to highlight and emphasize on three important points. First of all, we need to have research or evidence-based research on the topic so that we can provide a basis for the planning, for the policymakers, for the donors, and international development organizations. So we need to include this issue in the academia and research organizations, that what are the challenges persons with psychosocial disabilities face in society, and why and how they are still excluded from the overall development process. Number one. Number two, I would like to mention that we need a strong capacity building, a two-way capacity building, a twin track. First, we need to build the capacity of organizations of persons with disabilities who are not including, even now, persons with psychosocial disabilities. We need to build a capacity that how to include the disability advocacy, how to include them in the disability advocacy. And on the other side, we need to build the capacity of international development organizations, mainstream NGOs, mainstream development actors to understand the issues of persons with psychosocial disability. So, and the third point, which is the most important point, I would say, and if we will not address this point, we will not be able to include persons with psychosocial disabilities or underrepresented groups in the development discourse and practice. And that is the planning, including in the budgeting, and in the national budgeting, in the development budgeting, or in the budgets of international development organizations and donors. So this topic, the particular issue, need to be included in the agenda of the international donors and development organizations to address the inclusion of persons with psychosocial disability. So these are the three components which still need a lot of discussion and detailed technical input from the organization like TCI, and need to have donors with us on the same table so that we can discuss how to include underrepresented groups in the development practices. And the last thing which I need to mention, that persons with the psychosocial disabilities are still out of mainstream at all levels. So the development sectors, thematic sectors, disaster risk reduction, education, political participation, broadly speaking, health, and infrastructure, they need to consider this point at the priority basis. Otherwise, they will remain uncounted and unheard population of the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Atif Saab. It was really wonderful hearing from you and Sally that how the cross-disability movement can play a role and can play a very important role in supporting the movement of people with psychosocial disabilities, and then elimination of the mental health laws, including people with psychosocial disabilities in the disability legislations and policies and discussions, talking about political participation, talking about civic rights, talking about community support services. So thank you so much once again for sharing these important and highlighting these important points which we need to focus and work together on. And include and due to the time, we have to just run with the closure of this webinar. And in conclusion, I want to say that investments should be carried out for the community support systems rather than institutions. And we need an identity as persons with disabilities, and not as patients or people with unsound mind. There must be full inclusion of people with psychosocial disabilities in housing programs, in social protection schemes, providing in-kind supports such as cash transfers, providing personal support systems, establishing peer support networks, community support networks. And this all we need to do for the well-being and inclusion of people with psychosocial disabilities. And one last point, we are also very thankful to the CRPD committee for leading the process of preparing the draft guidelines on deinstitutionalization. And we would love to working together with the governments, with the cross-disability and all other stakeholders for full and effective implementation of those guidelines at the national level, at the regional level, at the global level. And it's a tool to overcome discrimination against people with psychosocial disabilities. And the guidelines must be enforced to end institution. I thank you all, and I wish you all that you have a great COSP season. Thank you so much for joining us today. Have a great day.
Thank you and have a great day too. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you so
Goodbye.
much. Thank you,
Okay.
everyone. Have a great day.
Goodbye.